Hello, this is Derek Manky coming to you live with FortiGuard Labs, broadcasting out of our research and development area in Vancouver, British Columbia. Today, I am joined by my co-host, Aamir Lakhani. How are you doing, Aamir?
Good, Derek. I'm doing good. I'm actually out of Houston at home today, so like pretty much 90% of the world working from home.
Yeah, how's the weather over there? We got snow still in April in Canada. Can you believe that?
It's Houston. It's always hot and always muggy and humid, so it doesn't matter what time of day or year you're in. It's Houston weather.
Yeah, I'm a little envious there. So you hit on the key word. So actually, yourself and I we released a blog just today on FortiGuard talking about the preparing for the surge in the attacks on remote workers. You hit on the keyword remote. I'm seeing this all over the place now. Remote. There's obviously, with the nature of everybody going remote, there's a slew of threats that are following that we've already seen. So we've been releasing research from FortiGuard Labs. We're looking at our threat statistics. As you know, you're in the weeds on this every day. Myself too, working with our data science team and FortiGuard Labs. So just looking at things like virus activity as an example, right? We did a baseline and looked year over year. From January to February to March, there was respectively a 13, 52, and a 131% spike in cyber virus activity. I say cyber virus because, of course, there's always this analogy to real viruses. But you're always looking at darknet, Aamir, and I know you work closely with our research team too. So what are you seeing from a threat perspective that's happening right now with this whole remote nature?
Well, there at FortiGuard Labs, we're always tracking threats all the time. And the nature of threats, like the volume has always been increasing, but I think the nature of threats is changing just a little bit. Obviously, people are working from home. There's a lot more phishing emails coming out. Obviously, because of the pandemic, obviously because of playing on people's emotions, there's things coming out about subjects on corona, whether it's cures or new treatments. But all these phishing emails have malware in them, and the malware can be things from information stealers to something very destructive, such as ransomware. So we're seeing that. On top of that, like as you mentioned on the darknet, traditionally on the darknet, we see things on the darknet, but most of the time, like especially marketplaces, they're like drugs, right? That's the majority of things on there. We're starting to see a little bit of a shift now, and I think it could be because people are scared about the economy, but we're seeing like these get rich quick schemes. For example, I saw like a Uber scheme where you could like sign up to be a driver and a rider and do like GPS spoofing and try and make money at the same time. We're seeing a lot more credit cards. And then obviously we're seeing just medicine, like one day on the news, they may talk about, hey, this medicine may be looking promising, or they're doing some research on it. And all of a sudden you see that on the darknet. Now, I highly doubt that medicine is being sold. It's probably like sugar pills or who knows. Yeah. It's being sold for $300 to $500. So people are, and it's being sold, like you can see it actually being run out. And so people are getting taken advantage of.
Yeah, and this is, to me, these are things that we've seen time and time again. I mean, there's famous cases. You look back, like Silk Road as an example, right? Over a decade ago, and there's always been this case of selling illicit drugs, of selling, black market things, including crime as a service, crimeware kits, all those sorts of things. But they just seem to adapt, and that's what we're talking about on the blog, is how cyber criminals are adapting to this new attack surface, right? Well, really capitalizing on it. In terms of the fake drugs, this is something that's been a struggle for decades. I remember, when I was first a threat researcher at FortiGuard Labs in 2004, we're looking back then at the fake pharmaceuticals. Those still go on, but like back then it was the Canadian pharmacy scams, if you remember those. It was prolific, right? And you're right. I think to the point is that now a lot of those platforms, including Tor and Darknet, are just being are shifting or adapting now to this new normal.
Yeah. On top of that, like what's kind of funny is I'm seeing so many like auctions, I would say, like on the darknet on streaming website usernames and passwords, whether it's like Disney Plus or HBO or Netflix. Since they know everyone's at home, so they're like, hey, get a lifetime account for like $10. Who knows if it's going to work or not, but I think they're taking advantage of that, and you can see people buying those as well.
Yeah, it might work for a day or two. Definitely things that people, in this day and age, people are always looking for a good deal for sure, right? Yeah, it's interesting. You talked about the get rich scams. That's something, again, in the past we've typically seen with money laundering networks, right? It's common from time to time for these large criminal organizations to have fake landing sites that they rip off from legitimate companies, and then modify some wording, some job postings, things like account payable positions, which is just really money mules, right? So people will sign up to what they think is an account payable position, sitting in their chair at home and transferring some funds to this other bank account, getting like a 5% commission cut out of that, where in fact they're actually doing the criminal activity because they're the mule themselves. But I think we're going to see a lot more of those, to your point, happening now in this climate, because people are just, there's a lot of people out of a job and looking for a job, and it's an especially vulnerable point. Yeah.
Exactly. One of the other things I think people are not really commenting on, especially on other blogs, is you see all these attacks of people at home being attacked. But I think we're also seeing, especially at FortiGuard Labs, we're seeing this increase of attacks in the cloud and cloud-based attacks. I think people are rushing towards like deploying on the cloud now, right? They're like trying to get applications as fast as possible. And a lot of times it may not be corporate sponsored. It may be an organization within a company that is just trying to put things into the cloud, or maybe enable like RDP remotely or something like that. And we're just seeing attacks. And I know me and you were talking about it, but we've seen just this tremendous increase in RDP attacks. And when I first looked at that, I was like, this can't be real. There's no corporate security entity that's going to allow remote RDP, especially with the attacks that we had last year and some of the 0 days that came out. But most likely what's happening is that there's these shadow IT organizations that are just trying to get up and running pretty fast. And then on top of RDP, we're seeing more and more like things like just S3 buckets and cloud buckets not being secured. People are not caring about web application firewalls or WAF. They're not putting in like endpoint protection like FortiEDR. They're just like not caring about that. They're trying to get access first and fast before the end.
It becomes a Band-Aid, really, right?
Right.
Yeah.
We're kind of into this game of like where it was like in like the early 2000s, where like people kind of forgot about security.
Yeah, I know it is. It does seem to be going backwards, which is a scary thought, right? It's a classic example with RDP. I mean, this is a protocol that's like 20 years old, going back to the XP/NT days, and there's been so many vulnerabilities. And look at WannaCry, Eternal Blue, Blue Keep, all of these. Huge waves of attacks that have been incredibly successful, and I expect we could see an even more successful attack now, given exactly what you're talking about. In fact, we're looking at the FortiGuard Labs telemetry data for our IPS sensors, right? So we're processing over 100 billion threat events any given day here in our data center. We're seeing on average over 10 million IPS attacks a minute. I mean, that's a lot. And the number one attack we're seeing is RDP right now. Years ago, we were telling everybody to close those publicly accessible RDP ports. Blueprint software like tools like Shodan or port scanning is able to easily pick this up, and people are literally inviting attackers in to their own home, essentially, by doing this, which is backwards, right? So it's a scary sort of perfect storm, because you have now the number one attack we're seeing is RDP, but two, people are just opening up more RDP ports and services. So that's a problem. Hey, so you talked about the cloud. That's interesting, and I agree. Like, it's this whole ecosystem now. It's end to end. So we're just talking about the cloud-based attacks, but what about the users themselves, right? So RDP is obviously one example of that on the client side, but we're talking, in our blog we talked about the end users themselves. To me, this is in the COVID-19 crisis right now, everyone's talking about social distancing, users, people having to each do their part, right? And it's the same thing really when it comes to cyber attacks. So tell me a little bit about what's going on, what we saw, maybe recap in the blog about the email-based scams and malicious documents that we're seeing too.
Well, first of all, if anyone's watching this broadcast on the same network that their kids are doing Netflix on in the living room right now, you're not social distancing IT, okay? You got to like take that concept with IT as well, is that there are going to be attacks now based on getting into other devices like your home IoT devices, video game systems, phishing emails on chats and stuff. They may be targeting people that are in your household to get to you and get to your corporate environment. So that's that's something to pay attention to. Phishing emails are on the rise like crazy, and we've seen that people are targeting targeting individuals all over the household, right? It's just not the corporate users, not just a guy going to work in his office. Targeted everywhere, and these systems, this malware, these threats spread throughout the entire network. And so I think it's really important to like segment. Even basic routers these days usually have some sort of segmentation capability available, even if it's very basic. But I think that's important. And then on top of that, like you have to have good hygiene on even at home. You have to have updates. You have to make sure that you're not using services you don't need, you're not downloading things from sites that are kind of like suspicious in nature.
Yeah, that's a great point. So there's always these analogies we talk about, right? And what's happening now in the current crisis is if a household member is quote unquote a threat and becomes infected, there's social distancing, there's quarantine, there's effectively segmentation, physically isolating in a room. Now, I'm not saying that parents have to physically isolate themselves from the kids. Maybe they do want to sometimes. But virtually, to your point, segmentation from those services that the kids or anyone else in the household is using is really important, because we always talk about this, especially with IoT devices. They can easily, they're often the most vulnerable to be compromised, right? Once they're owned, they're essentially springboards, right? Attackers can laterally move in an unsegmented network to another device, i.e. your corporate device. And oftentimes this is the way that infections happen. So it's definitely something that people should be paying attention to. And segmentation, this cyber distancing that we're talking about, knowing who's approaching you and talking to you in terms of social engineering, are always things that need to be front in mind. Well, hey, that's up for our time today, Aamir. I'm going to see you, I'm sure, again, as I do every day. So let's keep on doing all the great research. Thanks so much for your time, and thanks so much for the time of all the viewers out there. You're rest assured at FortiGuard Labs, we are here 24/7, 365 from our great task force, researchers and analysts to our automation, our machine learning and AI environments on the back end. We got you covered. Until next time, this is Derek Manky, and thank you again, Aamir Lakhani, for your time. Take care.